Hey everyone, welcome to Product Momentum. I'm Sean Murray, Director of Product Management here at ITX.
And I'm Dan Sharp, a Product Manager at ITX. It's our privilege to continue the Product Momentum journey, a platform that celebrates the thinkers and doers who are shaping the future of software development.
That's right, Dan. Our goal is to introduce you to industry leaders, innovators, and practitioners and bring you their insights, advice, and innovations. We talk with experts from product strategy, UX research and design, security, engineering, leadership, and more. We'll discuss how their approaches to problems help empower teams and build trust. And we'll explore trends, tools, and techniques that your team can use to deliver the software solutions your users need today. So tune in, stay curious, and join the conversation.
You can catch us on your favorite listening platform, or if you prefer the video experience, you can find all our latest episodes on the Product Momentum YouTube channel.
And if you like what you hear, be sure to subscribe, like, comment, and share. That way, we can be sure to provide you with the best podcast experience.
Tim, we just had an awesome conversation with Brian Piper, really getting into how to implement AI successfully, building content strategy, what it does well. What were your takeaways?
Well, AI has been top of mind for me this week. There was that MIT study that came out that 95% of AI projects fail to have a productive impact on the company. But that also means that 5% of them do have an impact on productivity. And I think in the product world, those are numbers that we're comfortable with, right? It's about being brave and running experiments to find that 5% because it could be huge. And because of the flexibility of AI tools, they can impact a lot of things in the content world, from data analysis to find new ways to reach your audiences or new messages. It can have an impact, a positive impact on content creation and accelerating those processes. And of course, there are interesting things that content people need to know about how users are finding their messages out in the world. So it was a really great conversation with Brian, and I think you'll enjoy it.
Yeah, let's not wait any longer. Let's get to it. Welcome to the pod. Today, joining me as co-host is Tim Snedden. Tim is a content strategist. He's responsible for delivering crystal clear information to users right when they need it. He recently spoke at the 2024 Flower City AI conference on the efficacy of large language models for accelerating content creation, and he leads AI initiatives at ITX. Super happy to have Tim here. This is going to be fun. Our guest from Rochester, so we have a local guest, really excited, Brian Piper. Brian's an expert in digital content strategy. He's been creating online training programs for dozens of companies, including Xerox, L3Harris, IBM, and Volvo. He's spoken at hundreds of conferences and events. Recently, in the last 5 years, he's been diving into AI, Web3, community building, and the metaverse. But that's not all. He is also an author and podcast host. He's written Epic Content Marketing for Higher Education, which you can see behind him, and co-authored the book's second edition with Joe Pulizzi. He's also host of his own pod, AI for You podcast, focusing on AI implementation in higher education. So that is awesome. Really excited to have you here, Brian. Why don't we dive right into it?
Sounds good.
So, right, I think today we really want to talk about how to implement AI in terms of content strategy, right? How companies can start leveraging data in AI models. But before we get into all of that, I want to know, how do you define a great content strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that a lot of companies, institutions, brands are always focused on is putting content out there, right? You want to get a lot of content out there. You want to get eyeballs on your content. The problem is a lot of that content isn't connected directly to business strategies, or it's not focused specifically on your audiences. So one of the things I always say is no more random acts of content. If every piece of content you create does not have a specific end goal or a specific audience you're trying to connect with, you're wasting your time and you're just, throwing content out into the wilderness, hoping that it connects with someone. Real content strategy, much more intentional, much more data inspired, and much more focused on helping you reach your specific goals and helping your audience gain value from that content.
Love that. Yeah, I love not throwing content just out in the void and hoping for the best. All right, yeah, since we have that, we have that baseline of, good content strategy is tied to your business outcomes. Yeah, really curious, where your experience has led in terms of just, getting data and starting to bring AI in to improve that strategy, improve your content delivery.
Yeah, I mean, AI can really help at every stage of your content, life cycle, whether it's looking at your existing data to see what content is performing well, and then using AI to help you augment and amplify that content, repurpose existing content for new platforms, new audiences, new distribution channels, looking at your data to identify where you have gaps in your content. And one of the areas we're really focusing on with content is discoverability, because we know that search is changing, SEO is going through, evolution. People aren't just going to Google anymore. They're looking on social, they're looking in communities, they're looking in AI. So we have to figure out how to get our content into all of those channels, best performing content that you can put out there, highest quality content, and to make sure that it's connecting with those audiences on those channels. And, we all tend to run marketing and run content teams from, limited resources, limited headcount. We'd love to just be able to add more people to increase our range and our effectiveness. We can't always do that, but AI really gives you that superpower to be able to scale and to be able to be really intentional and smart about the content that you are creating.
Absolutely. That's a huge strength that you touched on as well about leveraging your data to identify new ways to reach your audiences. I think when it comes to AI and large language models, especially, people seem to zoom right into the content creation part of these tools as opposed to looking at your data sets and identifying those ways that you can inspire your audiences in new ways.
Yeah,
I'd love to.
go ahead.
Oh, no, please go ahead.
I was just going to say, when a lot of the consulting that I do, when I go into organizations, they are very focused on the content creation side of things. And, we start doing pilot projects and we find that we can save, like, anywhere from 25 to 40% time savings on the content creation side of things. But when you start looking at the data analysis side of things, sometimes we'll see like 60 to 80% time savings in the data analysis and the insights gathering part of the content process versus just the creation process. So AI is really good with data.
One thing I'm curious about is change management. There's a lot of skepticism out there in the world with regards to AI tools, especially among, leadership, right? Uh, when it comes to change management and implementing AI tools, what steps would you recommend for helping individual contributors and leadership become more comfortable with experimenting with AI?
Well, that's one of the first things that I really emphasize anytime I'm working with anyone on figuring out how to integrate AI is this is not just another technology adoption project. This is not just adding another tool to your tech stack. This is really change management. You have to get buy-in from all the right people, whether that's the individual contributors who are actually doing the work, or leadership, or legal, or IT. You have to have all those people in the conversation at the very beginning, or you're going to run into roadblocks. You're going to start implementing, you're going to find opportunities, you're going to identify pilot projects, you're going to start maybe having some use cases, and maybe even creating some case studies that show real improvement. But then all it takes is one person to kind of put up the red flags and stop the process. So you really need to, right from the beginning, make sure you're using awareness and education at every level of the adoption cycle so that everyone understands why you're doing this, how you're going to integrate, why this isn't a threat to your jobs, how this is going to make life easier for you and your customers. And, really understanding that and coming at this from a change management perspective is the only way to really have successful AI integration, because this is not just, we're not just adding a new tool to make us more efficient. This is really a mindset shift of how do we collaborate with this, intelligence that we're working with to make sure that we're getting the most out of us, that we're leveraging our experience and expertise to add the most value for our customers and to help us reach our business goals faster.
I love that. I really love the fact that, you're talking about change management, not as just like, how do I get this tool in front of people, but how do I, get the people involved to understand the value and buy in, especially with pilot programs. I'm curious, with that, running the pilot programs, how have you seen then the kind of folks you work with expand their rollouts of AI from pilot programs into like a more fully fledged solution?
Yeah, and it really goes back to, I mean, when you're switching from piloting mode to scaling mode, it really is important that you are strategic and intentional about where you're going to start integrating. Because, I mean, AI, really covers so many different roles. It taps into every facet of the work that we do, but you need to look at all of your workflows and figure out where it's gonna have the biggest impact, where you're gonna see the biggest gains, the most improvements, and really, especially at first, the measurable improvements. Because it's important to be able to take this message to leadership and show, here's the time savings, here's the quality improvement that we're seeing. And once you start getting buy-in on those areas and they start recognizing the opportunities, it's only then that you're really going to start shifting that mindset for people to start thinking of different ways that we can reach our goals and changing the workflows that we've established that are now optimized, but how can we switch our entire processes to be, you know, more effective and more efficient, really to help us reach our goals.
I'm interested, yeah, that's great. And I'm interested to learn some more about some specific examples of this in the real world. Examples of these pilot programs or examples of successful scaling, especially in the realm of content and content marketing.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many use cases. So some of the different institutions that I work with have, so Ivy Tech Community College integrated an AI tool into their student success programs where they would monitor students and look for, students that were skipping classes or a drop in grades or, different indicators that would show that there was some issue that maybe, the students weren't performing up to full capabilities. And that would trigger a call from one of the counselors that would, be able to go out and talk to the students and say, hey, there are resources available to you. There are groups, there is mentoring, there is, you can talk with your professors. What's the problem? Where are you seeing difficulties? And they saw like a 95% conversion from students who were failing and probably in the past would have failed out and withdrawn from school to passing grades and success. So just, not even just thinking about how do we get more students onto campus, but how do we keep the students that we have? How do we measure opportunities for engagement and where you want to add that human connection, that human element? And it's funny that, my podcast all the time, it always comes back to, a good implementation of AI will help you create a stronger human connection with your audiences because it takes away all that time that you have to spend answering questions. Forsyth Technical Community College integrated an AI powered CRM that you know, integrated chatbots onto their website and allowed them to save like hundreds of hours of time every month, not having to answer all the common questions that their student success teams were getting inundated with. And then their student success teams had all this extra time that they were able to actually spend engaging with students and talking about, different problems that weren't quick, easy FAQ answers. So, leveraging AI to do those monotonous tasks, those repetitive tasks, it helps create consistency in your messaging. If everyone is using a brand voice GPT that will look at your content that's going out and saying, well, these aren't the terms that we use. I mean, across an organization, you might have a dozen people, you might have 100 people who are sending out different marketing messages. If they're all using one consistent brand voice AI tool, it can help kind of guide their messaging so that it now all seems to be coming from a consistent perspective. It's all aligned with the brand voice. So there's a ton of opportunities out there. It's just trying to figure out which ones are going to have the highest return for you when you implement them.
And I think so. Guess we got like our banner quote for this episode right there, right? That a good AI implementation is creating deeper human connections. Because because you're not doing kind of the trivial stuff, you can really focus on like the big thinking problems. I want to switch gears a little bit just because earlier on you mentioned that 60 to 80% savings with implementing AI and analyzing data. I'm curious for those listening, what would you recommend in terms of just a good data practice, so that they can leverage AI and actually have it see those rewards?
Yeah, so, first of all, I'll throw out the caveat that you have to make sure that any data that you're putting into the system does not have like PII, PHI, any personal information in there. Even with the paid versions of these tools, you know, the models may not be training on the data that you're uploading, but that data is still in the systems. And we have seen, you know, instances where Google searches have started returning ChatGPT prompts that were entered into the system. So there are ways that data can leak out. So unless you're using either an on-site uh, private large language model, or you are using an API version of one of these large language models where you can control where the data goes, you have to be careful about what data you use. That said, any low risk data, like content performance data, all sorts of data that is public, that's out there that anybody else can get access to, can reveal incredible opportunities for you. So, for example, when I was at University of Rochester, we had a dashboard that showed us all the different, it came directly from Google Search Console. So it showed us all the different terms that people were searching on and finding our content, what pages they were going to, how many times they were clicking, all this great data. But even on just our news site, we had 950,000 keywords that we were ranking for. So typically, when I would do our analysis in the past, I would kind of sort a few different ways and look through the top like 50 or 100 results to figure out which ones were, the ones that the low hanging fruit we should go after and try to optimize for. Now we can feed that information into AI, and it can look through all of those keywords. It can find correlations, it can find anomalies, it can find clusters of content topics where we already have search dominance, that then we can create more content in those areas. AI is great at gap analysis. I mean, as humans, we are great at seeing what's in front of us, but not so great at seeing what's missing. AI is excellent at seeing what's missing. So it can look at all the content you're creating and saying, here's a big gap in your content. Or if you're looking at engagement cycle and trying to get people, your customers moving to the next step of the engagement cycle, AI can look at your content performance data at your Google Analytics and say, people are dropping off at the awareness stage. They're not coming through, and they're not getting to the consideration stage. So you need to create some content that will move them to the next level in the cycle. So here are some ideas for that. So it's, one of the first use cases that I presented to my boss when we were trying to get them moving towards AI adoption. I did 3 months worth of work in a week, but it was work that we never would have done previously because it would have just taken too long and been too time intensive. But thanks to AI, we were able to get all sorts of insights out of multiple different data sets that we never would have been able to spend our time doing before.
Love that.
Okay. And really interesting as well about the time impact, right? The ability to produce more value, do more valuable work in a shorter time horizon, thanks to these advanced tools. But I would love to zoom in a bit into more of that individual contributor level. You had mentioned previously custom GPTs for tone and voice analysis, for example. And I think that anyone who works in content who's listening knows that tone and voice can be one of those really tricky things to nail down, especially when you're just fresh to a project, you're on a new client, and can be extremely difficult. And some of these tools can really help with some of those more tricky tasks, accelerating your ability to become comfortable with a specific brand's voice especially. But it's difficult to measure the impact of things like this, right? Do you have any recommendations or strategies for ways that you can measure the impact of AI implementations that veer towards sort of those softer skills?
Yeah, and a lot of those, the impact is not directly from the original content production. So, for example, I've worked with organizations who have put out leadership messages, and it's not always the leader that is writing those leadership messages. Someone else is crafting the message and then giving it to them for approval. So, fairly easy to train a custom GPT or a model on, previous communications that have gone out so that it can get an idea of, what the tone and what the voice is and kind of how they structure their content. And so then when it's time to create a new message, you may not save time on the actual crafting of the message itself, but where you're going to save time is on the approval process. So instead of having to go back and forth 3 or 4 times and have the president or whoever it is like make changes or make adjustments in the message and then send it back, a lot of times having that custom GPT to pass that initial message through will help you save back and forth times. So sometimes it's figuring out what you need to measure to show improvement. And then sometimes it's really difficult to, specifically define where the improvement is. You just know that, fundamentally this process has gotten better, it's gotten easier. That's why during the pilot project phase, we really focus on projects that you can measure on where are we going to show improvement on this. And then once you get into scaling, then it becomes easier to just identify roadblocks, identify barriers. Where are you running into issues where you're spending time that you probably don't need to be spending in your workflows? There's an opportunity to create a AI solution for that.
Super timely that you guys are talking about custom GPTs. We just had Lena Cesardich on the pod, and she was talking about just like the power behind building custom GPTs, but also that it's not actually as daunting as you might think it is. Right? It's actually pretty easy to do. So
Yeah.
that's super cool.
Yeah, I mean the ability, AI has really democratized code development in a lot of ways. I mean, anybody can go in and vibe code, anybody can go in and make a custom GPT. I don't know that I would use any of these for anything more than proof of concept. I'm not going to launch a product out into market that I just vibe coded, in my basement. Um, but having some developers on your staff who can look at the code and understand the code. I mean, it all comes down to having that expertise. Expertise is still the secret sauce that makes any of these tools work better. You have to have enough knowledge about the strategy, the audience, the goals to be able to feed the right information into the tool. And then at the end, you have to be able to look at the output and know if it is accurate and if it is quality and what parts and pieces you can use out of that. We always tell people these tools are not 100%. These are not copy and paste tools, at least not at this point. But if they can get you 60% of the way there, 40% of the way there, think of all the time that you're saving. And I've got a dozen custom GPTs that I use for my personal life that save me so much time. It's well worth the $20 a month that I spend on those. And then when you start looking at some of the ways that different businesses have implemented these, I mean, Moderna launched ChatGPT Enterprise to all 6,000 employees. And within 4 months, they had 750 custom GPTs that their employees had created and were sharing, and everybody was helping other people solve problems because it's so easy to just go in and just tell this tool what you want it to do for you. It's pretty incredible.
Absolutely. And I really vibe with what you're saying about accelerating, especially that handoff, right? So many projects can encounter rough waters when something moves, for example, from content to design or design to development. If you're able to whip up a prototype, something that's absolutely not secure or production ready, but it helps you communicate what you're striving for, I think that can really be a time accelerator. And I think we should dig into the use of custom GPTs in alternative ways as well. For example, for user testing, for example. There's a lot of hubbub out there about things like synthetic users, for example. What differences do you see? Well, first of all, do you use synthetic users? Do you have a strategy around that? And if so, what differences do you see in the outputs of something like a synthetic user response versus what an actual human being would say in testing?
So I love custom GPT personas. I think that is a huge opportunity. And that's usually one of the first projects that I'll take on when I go into an organization because it gives you a sounding board to be able to test all of your content against before you put it out into market. And I often tell people don't replace your traditional personas with AI created personas. Still create, your traditional personas. If you have an ideal customer profile, that's great. Create a traditional persona out of that. Do interviews with your audience members, get all that data and all that information, and then dump all of that into a custom GPT. So now you have this kind of on-demand persona that you can ask questions about. You can dump in a piece of content, you can point it at an article online on your website and say, what are we missing out of this? What would be more relevant for you? What would resonate with you out of this content that we're not including? And, you know, one of the neat things about custom GPTs is once you create one, then you can test it with that audience. You can give your custom GPT a set of questions. You can give a focus group audience that set of questions and compare the answers. And then you can fine tune that model. And you can even create multiple different personas because most businesses, have more than one type of individual that they're trying to target. So you can create multiple personas. You can pull them all into one chat room and have them talk with each other. And you can run virtual focus groups where you're creating conversations between different personas within this simulated environment that then you can talk to and bounce ideas off of. So I think there's just a ton of opportunity. We're going to see a lot more of these synthetic audiences being used for A/B testing, for providing feedback before you go out to market with products and tools for ideating. Not only are they good at, reflecting back that audience thoughts and ideas, but they're also very good at identifying gaps, finding things that you're not doing competitive analysis. Just so many opportunities with those.
Really curious as kind of the non-content expert of the three of us. When you're working in that environment where you have the kind of the synthetic users, the chat bots kind of talking to each other. How do you avoid, maybe falling into a pitfall of relying solely on the AI generated outputs and not talking to real humans?
Yeah, and a lot of that depends on the gravity of the content that you're creating. So, if you're creating content for crisis communications, you probably don't want to be using AI a lot for that. Maybe to do some gap analysis, maybe to look and see if the tone of the messaging comes across right for that audience. But I certainly wouldn't be crafting any, crisis messages using AI. And we've seen instances of that not working out well for different organizations. Um, and I think it really goes back to having that expertise at the end of the AI output. You have to be able to look at the output. You need at least a person who is an expert or who has, some serious experience in that area. Ideally, a group of people from different backgrounds that can look at that content and say, "Oh, well, we're missing this, or we're not addressing the needs of this audience." Um, that's where you really need the expertise, the experience. I mean, AI is really bad at, taste. Is this better or is this better? You really need the human input and the experience to be able to look at that and say, this is what we want. This is what's going to go out to our audience. And that's one thing that AI cannot do is take responsibility for content that you put out. That always goes back to a human somewhere down the road.
Absolutely. So we've covered a lot of like different AI implementations in our field, right? From the data analysis through to the individual contributor level testing. But of course, it's not just the people who are creating the content, planning the content that are using these tools, right? Like more web users are conducting web searches through large language models like ChatGPT or Perplexity. And so as more web searchers go through these LLM tools, what approaches should content marketers be looking at today in order to tell your story when you know that your story is going to be digested and transformed by a large language model?
Yeah, and it's critical, the search landscape has changed dramatically. So I started doing SEO back in '96, which just means that I'm old, but it also means that I've seen a lot of things change in that technology, and I haven't seen anything have the impact on search that AI has had. And these zero-click searches are really cutting down on the amount of organic traffic that websites are receiving. We're seeing numbers across the board where companies are seeing less and less organic traffic. Now, a lot of that initial organic traffic that we got, if you look at the intent of those searches, were informational. So I think it's fine that the AI is providing that information and answering those questions, but you want to make sure that your content is getting into those search results. And the thing that I keep saying is that in this day and age, distribution equals discoverability. You have to have the best content out there on your website, on YouTube, in Reddit, on your social channels, in different communities. That is where AI is going to find the information and to scrape and to collate all this data together. So you have to be in all those places, and especially as your audiences are searching on all those places, you have to have your content optimized for those channels. And the only way that we can do that is to use AI to help us repurpose, retarget, and redistribute our high performing content. So you can use AI to look at your content data, figure out what content is driving the most traffic, what questions people are asking about that content, and then figure out how you answer those questions on all the channels where your users are searching and where AI is scraping, so that when AI thinks about how it's going to deliver that result, you're top of mind for it. And we saw this as I work with different companies, different organizations, leaning into those featured snippets. Like we used to target the featured snippets in Google, right? The people also ask. Those conversational questions are the way that people are searching on voice, the way they're searching in AI. And so if you put those questions and the answers in your content, you're going to show up better. You're going to be better in the AI results.
That was awesome. Yeah, Brian, this has been an incredibly informative conversation. I feel like, yeah, as a product manager, if we just replace content strategy with product strategy, everything you said applies directly to that. So thank you for that. Have a few takeaways from our conversation. So I think, the first one, right? Good content strategy is not just blindly firing content out in the void and hoping for the best, right? It needs to be tied to your business outcomes, yeah, your business strategy. Um, Love the conversation about change management, right? The change management is not so much, hey, this tool is rolling out on Thursday. It's about talking to the humans who are involved, promoting the value, starting small, sharing the wins, really communicating. You know, you had speaking of, is like human connection, right? We talked about how, yeah, AI as a tool, it makes it easy to do, kind of those repetitive tasks, yeah, the FAQ type stuff, and deepens that human connection where people can go and solve the hard problems, kind of person to person, group to group. Really, really love that. I love how you're mentioning AI is so good at finding gaps, that it's so strong at analyzing data. So if you have a thoughtful data strategy, you can reap huge rewards out of your AI tools. But also be careful and make sure that your private information isn't accidentally ending out in the public domain. So this is great. Want to wrap it up just with two thoughts. I mean, so the first one, Brian, is, what have you got going on? What would you like our listeners to hear that you're doing? And then the second one, I personally, it's a selfish question, but what are you reading? What should I be adding to my to read list?
Yeah, so I'm doing a lot of speaking at conferences, connecting with audiences, and more consulting. So any group or organization, business looking to figure out how to integrate AI in a responsible, ethical, and effective way, I'm glad to help out with that. And I just finished reading Empire of AI, which was a fascinating book. Really goes into some different kind of history of the AI evolution. And then one of my favorite books is Ethan Mollick's Co-Intelligence. Really consumable, really gets down to like how to work and collaborate with these tools. Um, and if you want a book that is terrifying and exciting at the same time, The Coming Wave by Mustafa Suleiman is fantastic.
All right, there's some good recommendations. And I mean, don't forget your own book, Epic Content Marketing.
Absolutely. If you're looking to do content marketing, that is the handbook for that. So
All right. Well, this has been an awesome conversation. I am much better informed than I was 30 minutes ago. So, Tim, Brian, really appreciate you guys coming and hanging out with me.
thanks so much for having me on. Really appreciate it. Great conversation.
Agreed. Thank you.
Well, that's it for today. In line with our goals of transparency and listening, we really want to hear from you. Sean and I are committed to reading every piece of feedback that we get, so please leave a comment or a rating wherever you're listening to this podcast. Not only does it help us continue to improve, but it also helps the show climb up the rankings so that we can help other listeners move, touch, and inspire the world, just like you're doing. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next episode.